Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here, we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran hashtagging your music videos with the phrase Bob Seger feel, or else a scrappy upstart tagging your videos with the phrase drunk Aphex twin, this is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the second Friday of August 2020, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Antonin who drove one of those new Volkswagen buses that you didn't even know that they made modern versions of those. And it had multiple Flying Lotus bumper stickers on it. And old Antonin was always trying to blow massive flavored vape clouds all the time, and also trying to charge you $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. It powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in: hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free, social media integrations, mailing list tools. The Working Songwriter podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Just use the promo code TWS to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music in the coming months, you can join me every Sunday night over at YouTube at 9 p.m. Eastern for Sunday Songs. I play live. Listeners request songs via the live chat. They ask questions via the live chat. They interact with one another via the live chat. We're really building a nice community over there every week, and a community that actually includes many listeners to this podcast. So please join me every Sunday night at 9 p.m. Eastern over on YouTube for Sunday Songs. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a few things that you could do to help. First of all, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter or search for my name. Then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make a profound difference. So I'd love it if you did that. If you're not in a place where you can contribute financially, I totally get that. I've been there before. You could also help out the show for free by just leaving us a rating in the iTunes store, or you could just tell a friend about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. This week's show is a little bit more inside baseball than usual, but I think it'll still be interesting to people who aren't necessarily songwriters themselves. I hope you dig our chat. At the turn of the century, the recorded music industry was dealt a major blow, famously struck by Napster. Suddenly, via the internet, listeners were able to download entire libraries of albums without paying a cent. Obviously, because of copyright law, that was blatantly illegal, and those torrent services were soon brought to heel. But the genie had already been let out of the bottle in that it trained an entire generation of music listeners to expect music and content more generally to be free. Spotify stepped into the breach in 2008 to provide digital streaming for consumers and monetization for artists and labels. There are many artists and labels that have mixed feelings towards Spotify. There are many that are openly hostile. I don't pretend to know more than those parties, but I do notice that often criticisms of Spotify tend to elide the fact that there was a huge revenue cratering caused by Napster in the early aughts. That is, Spotify didn't step into the cash-rich album sales environment of the 1990s and wreck shop. It arrived after the business had already been decimated and tried to build something from there, with an audience that had already been trained to think en masse that music and content were free. So while I think there are plenty of good faith arguments to be had over how streaming works, I won't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And the fact that we have streaming in place on a massive level is good for music, especially now that Spotify features an artist portal where musicians themselves can have a hands-on approach to the worldwide distribution of their art. That's true democratization. As Spotify has taken on more of an editorial role, that is making playlists of songs in-house that have massive amounts of followers, a whole industry has sprung up around helping artists get their songs onto playlists and boosting their streaming or airplay. My guest today is the CEO of one of those companies, Streaming Promotions. Michael Sloane has held many different roles in the music business, including working in Taylor Swift's corner over at Big Machine Records. He stopped by our show this week to talk about best practices for artists looking to gain a bigger foothold in the streaming market. Michael Sloane, thanks so much for taking the time to be a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. Before we get into your company and streaming in general, could you tell our listeners a little bit about your background in the music business?
Happy to. I'll go all the way back. I got a finance degree from the University of Kentucky and pursued banking and consulting for a couple of years, but never really lost the itch to get into the music business. So I moved to Nashville, got my MBA at Belmont University, initially worked in publishing, music publishing, and then got a job with a startup web development and fan club company called Echo Music, which was acquired by Ticketmaster. I jumped over to Live Nation and Live Nation artist groups and ran the Nashville offices here for a couple of companies, Music Today being one of them, the other called Ultrastar. Ticketmaster and Live Nation merged. All those companies went away. I started my own company for a little while doing more website development, kind of the beginning, I guess, of social media marketing. And then I guess that was about 2008. And then from there, I got a job with this gal named Taylor Swift and kind of ran digital projects at her management company for a couple of years, and ultimately ended up at Big Machine Label Group, where I ran the digital department. And then from there, left and started Streaming Promotions. So it's been lots of jumps, but primarily all in the digital space, short the year or so I was in publishing, which I really enjoyed.
Well, it sounds like you've seen a lot of different parts of the music business. So when it came time to open up your own shop, what made you want to get into the streaming end of it? Why was that particularly interesting to you?
I've always thought, I even did a dissertation in grad school about, the ease of music consumption. I envisioned it, I guess, as many did, as like something on your radio where you just press a button and ultimately it would be saved to some type of catalog that you'd be able to play later. But consumption services it's just the easiest delivery mechanism to get music in the hands of fans. So I was a huge proponent of Spotify out of the gate. Even spoofed my IP at one point to get it downloaded from Europe when it wasn't available in the U.S. I just love the concept of having kind of all that music of recorded history just right there at your fingertips for consumption. So I also had maybe didn't leave on the greatest terms at Big Machine, just kind of disputes about how we should handle those consumption services. I left right after Big Machine released Taylor Swift's 1989. They pulled all of her music from consumption services, and at the same time pulled a couple of records that or I guess catalogs really, of a couple artists, Justin Moore and Brantley Gilbert. And my argument there was Taylor doesn't need discovery. I know while we're pulling her tracks, we're trying to sell records, but Brantley and Justin still definitely needed to, find more audience. And I felt like the best way to do that was to use these services, and use the tools that they had at their disposal to try to get as much exposure as possible. So I left and immediately started trying to figure out the best ways to work on behalf of artists to get better exposure on Spotify.
Wow. So you've seen the BC and the AD of streaming. You were in the business before it really took off, and obviously you're in it now. Can you describe what you saw on the ground? You said you spoofed your IP address to download a really early version of it from Europe. Can you describe how that took over market share? And was there a point at which you thought to yourself, like, okay, now Spotify has really made it, they're going to be ubiquitous. Everyone's great aunt is going to have this on their phone at some point?
I don't think I ever saw that, honestly. I've always been an early adopter of technology. So, even in the days of when I was in college, in the days of Napster and those things, you saw that as, obviously it was illegal, but you saw that it's hard to put toothpaste back in the tube. You can shut down Napster, but now you've got LimeWire or Morpheus or whatever else came after that. So in MySpace, music players, and like just seeing easier ways for fans to get a hold of music and listen to music. I love the idea of selling records, and I love the CD business. It was very profitable, but iTunes kind of disrupted that, and broke up the album from a full product to a 99-cent product. And then when I realized that there was an opportunity to be able to get even further, beyond that and just pay a subscription service, I felt like it was going to be something that at least the youth of America would start to gravitate towards. Then I introduced it to my dad, who's, now in his 70s, but at the time he was in his 60s. And he fell in love with the service. So yeah. I think maybe around there, I was like, oh, this isn't just cool because I can listen to all the music I want to. This is cool because it allows people of every generation to explore and discover, and, maybe you might be a huge Beatles fan, but have you listened to the entire collection? Or you might be a huge Sam Cooke fan, but it just allows a lot of exploration. I always thought that was really cool.
Yeah, introducing your parents to Spotify, it really reminds me of in like 2005 when I introduced my grandfather to MapQuest, and he was like, now let me get this straight. I can put in any address and then any other address, and it will get me directions. And like, he didn't believe it.
Right.
And it's the same thing with my folks when I showed them Spotify. They're like, so are the Beatles on there? You know what I mean? Like
exactly. And it initially weren't, but it got there.
Well, actually, I was about to say that was a horrible example on my part, but that's like the one example that we couldn't use. So what does in your mind, you do this for a living, you're living and breathing this every day. What does the streaming landscape really look like? Is it Spotify and then everybody else, or do those other streaming services, are they starting to make inroads as well?
Apple Music definitely has, it's Apple. So you also have to understand that's not their core product. I think what I appreciate most about Spotify, it is their core product, and they're trying to serve music fans. Amazon's got their streaming service. Pandora is somewhat aging, but I guess it's still working in some, for some genres. Quite honestly, I don't know how much I believe in the actual subscription numbers based on the bake-ins through cell phone providers and the rest. So, there's a lot of different ways that Apple has gained subscribers that might not be actually going and subscribing. And Spotify's done the same thing with discounts in different ways. So I do feel like they are the 800-pound gorilla in the room. It's definitely, I teach at Belmont, and I usually poll my students as to what they're using. And I would say 80% of them are using Spotify, and the other 20% are using Apple Music because their parents pay for it.
Oh, and it's through the phone thing. Got it. Yeah, that's interesting. So can you explain to our listeners, and just start from, assume that they know nothing with this description, what are playlists? How did that ecosystem get started? And what can they mean for artists both big and small?
Yes, starting at the very beginning, playlists when Spotify was Europe only, playlists were able to be created by users. Some of those more popular playlists, the more followed playlists, then made it on their way to Spotify's homepage. So you had these users, super users, if you will, that were either just good curators of music or good marketers of themselves. What I always loved about Spotify is it works much more like, a social media platform than any other services. So when Spotify got to the States, most of their homepage was made up of user-generated playlists because they didn't have a team curating music. Once they got a little more sophisticated and hired some folks to curate music specifically for Spotify, you got to see things like, today's top hits and New Music Friday, and genre by genre. You had lots of lists that were created by Spotify by those curators. Really, really early days, streaming promotions. My company had inroads into some of those Spotify editorial curators. That's all changed now with the Spotify portal and being able to submit music there. You can submit music through your Artist Insights page. So we really pivoted and went heavy into building a relationship with lots of user-generated playlists. So just individuals like you or me that for whatever reason are trying to build a following or have a good taste in music, but whatever we're trying to do is just get exposure. Those Spotify playlists, those editorial playlists, still have a great deal of weight. They hold a lot of weight if you can get on one of those. But probably 90+% of the tracks that are on there are going to be major label releases.
Got it. So you're saying that there was a time before people could submit singles via the artist portal on Spotify. There was a time when basically their editorial team was able to be lobbied and pitch songs in a way that they can't be anymore.
Yeah, it became the Wild West very quickly. If you know anything about independent musicians, they're quick to share that information. I got Doug Ford's email address. I got Mike Begane that runs New Music Friday. I've got his email address. So we realized about a year and a half in that we were barking up the wrong. We were just shouting in a crowd. We weren't being heard, and many people weren't being heard. I think that's the reason they created the submission portal. So there could be some type of. It was crazy for a little bit. Text message. I was with Allie Hagendorf, who ran Rock, or I think she still does run Rock at Spotify, and she got like 1,000 emails in about 2 hours that I spent with her. So it was
my Lord.
It was at a fever pitch.
And so those Spotify curated playlists, how are they? What is the power that those have versus user-generated ones? Do those tend to be more powerful than user-generated ones, or are they about the same, or how does that work?
It's going to be more powerful if you're on a Spotify editorial list, you're going to be it's on the homepage. It's going to be, if you go into a genre, those are going to be the first playlists that are listed. So, or a vibe or a mood, any of those things that you see on Spotify's homepage. So yes, that's going to carry more weight than the user-generated community. I think the difference between that is if you get on a user-generated playlist, you might stay on there for 2 years. If you're on a Spotify editorial list, you might stay on there for 2 weeks, or if it's New Music Friday, 1 week, or for a month. So they're going to change much more frequently. So
gotcha.
I think that's where we come in, is relying solely on Spotify and the editorial team to prop up tracks can be somewhat difficult.
Live by the sword, die by the sword is what you're saying.
Absolutely. It's like, well, here's the new boss, same as the old boss. Like, it used to be radio, now editorial. It's the same thing.
Yeah. It's almost exactly the same thing. It seems like. If you are an independent artist, you mentioned that a lot of those Spotify playlists that are proprietary are just filled with major label artists. If you are an independent artist looking to release to Spotify, what would you recommend if they weren't going to go with your company? They don't have the budget to do that. They're just going on their own. What would you say are best practices for independent artists releasing to Spotify?
Yeah, there's nothing that my company does that any independent artist couldn't do. We just had a 5-year head start and about 5,000 playlists we have relationships with. But for them to just reach out to a curator, it requires a little bit of reverse engineering, seeing if you can find their username, seeing if that username matches something on, any one of the social media platforms, reaching out, usually not reaching out directly and saying, add my music, but trying to, develop a relationship and have a conversation and see if they're willing to listen. And that's the best way to do it if you're going to go straight DIY. It is labor intensive. I've got a staff of 5 that do nothing but promote, and a staff of 3 that do nothing but research for new lists and try to make new connections. So it can be time intensive.
Yeah, I mean, it really sounds like it. Um, I What is the protocol now for releasing singles to Spotify? Do you just get one crack at releasing a single there, or should artists release several singles before it comes out? What's best practices as far as that goes?
As far as an album is concerned, I think, even the majors have started to break those up and go into more of an EP fashion. Daniel Ek was quoted not long ago, the CEO of Spotify, that, it's content, the platform itself needs content. It wants more releases. So it's basically, he's telling artists, release lots of music. We did a lot of research early days about what the rhythm of releases, best suited Spotify's, algorithmic playlist, Discover Weekly, Release Radar, Daily Mood, the radio functionality. How do you best get in the rhythm of releasing? And we found it to be about 3 months. If you're doing EPs and if you're doing singles, every 3 to 4 weeks, honestly. That requires any musician to be probably a little more prolific than they would naturally be. So I never really try to give advice on how you should release music. Like, basically, you're the artist. It's your art. Release it as you wish. If you want my opinion on how Spotify is going to consume it best, it's going to be in 3 to 5 song chunks every 3 months.
Wow, that's really interesting, man. And what's really interesting about that is that seems to harken back to the way that the music business worked in like the 50s and 60s. That's how artists used to release back then.
Very single. 45 in a very single driven business. So, you get the hit and then whatever the B-side was.
That's interesting. So if I'm an artist, leaving the aesthetic part of it aside, if I'm an artist that has a 10 or 12 song album, you're saying that if we're leaving the total, if you're not trying to make an artistic statement with those 12 songs in a certain type of way being put together, it seems like it would almost be better off for you to put out 2 EPs composed of those same 12 songs, but cut in half almost.
I'd say put out 4 EPs every quarter and release 3 or 4 tracks every 3 or 4 months. You're gonna you get more bang for your buck. You're gonna optimize, hopefully grow in listenership throughout that process. So your monthly listener number will increase, and from that will spark the algorithmic list, the Discover Weeklies, the Release Radars, the Daily. We see tracks stay in Release Radar for 2 to 3 weeks, Discover Weekly 2 to 3 months, and then you've basically, I guess, you've expired as much. You've gotten as much out of those algorithmic lists as you're going to get, and so it's basically the platform telling you release something else. I want more, and if you can time it right, where your monthly listener numbers are going up, you can grow and gain new audience on that next release. If you're on an uptick and you release right as you kind of plateau, you can spark a larger, I call them buckets because there's really a bucket of people, but you can spark a bigger bucket of listeners through Release Radar, and then hopefully that triggers more listening and you get an even larger audience through Discover Weekly.
That's really cool. So you said 3 or 4 different EPs, and for each one of those, even the singles within those EPs, you would space out from one another. You wouldn't drop all at once. You do sort of week to week.
You can definitely drop them all at once. I mean, I don't think we're necessarily in 2020 necessarily in a singles driven business at this point. You get a lot more singles that are released, but there's nothing saying you have to release them, kind of waterfall style, if you will. You can release 3 at the same time. You might have a priority track that you're, working at PR or maybe working at radio or something of that nature. But nothing wrong to tell Spotify that when you submit it to the portal that the priority track is this one. But I don't see anything wrong with releasing, 2 or 3 songs at a time. It just gives. I feel like that's always a binary action, right? If I release one track, people either like it or don't like it. Our company specifically works 3 to 5 songs at a time when we take on a campaign, because I want to give somebody more than just one shot at add this song. Well, here's 3 or 4 songs. Take a listen and tell me what you think. Just my philosophy, but there's no real
right
tried and true way to make it happen.
And One thing I've been thinking about a lot recently, and this is for where your business is. Um, Obviously, you don't have to think about this because you're not there doing this, but I've thought there's no reason why you can't release to Spotify in the way that you're describing right now, and then have your physical product that you ship to fans for fan service be something completely different. Like it could be that album with the 12 songs on it. It's just been released to Spotify in a different way.
Sure, there's nothing to say that after you release 3 or 4 EPs that you can't go back through your distributor and bundle it together as an album. That's possible too. And I agree with you. If physical product is still something that you've got an audience that will consume, then by all means, manufacture some CDs and ship them out there.
Professional songwriters with a budget behind them have their songs radio tested in different markets to discover how their sound compares to the sound of the songs at the top of the Billboard charts. But as an indie songwriter, what do you have? You play an iPhone recording of your latest demo to your Uncle Larry after he's drank like 6 Mickey's hand grenades and he tells you that it sounds like his favorite Aerosmith song from 1978? Where can you get some better feedback? Core Sound. Core Sound is a professional, AI-based music analysis tool available now as an iOS app. Core Sound determines the relevance of your music to the tops of Apple Music using the most advanced neural network algorithms. You simply download the app, upload your song, select a genre and market for comparison, and Core Sound does the rest. It lets you know how much your sound has in common with the sound of today's most popular songs. Core Sound is now available in Apple's App Store. So, let Uncle Larry mercifully pass out in the Barca Lounger on his back porch and leave the feedback on your songs to Core Sound. Do you find that artists have better success on the platform of Spotify when their releases tend to have a similar sonic character as one another? And do you think artists that put out albums that have sort of disparate sounds between albums, do you find that hurts them at all within particularly the algorithm picks?
It's not going to do damage necessarily. And I think this is always that gray area where I never want to, I'm not the artist, right? Like I can advise, I've done a lot of digital strategy in the past. I've set up a lot of campaigns. Like do what you want to do. But if you're doing something that's completely different from the sound of the last 3 EPs or albums that you've put out, maybe you call it something different and release it under a different title. It's just so it doesn't become confusing to the listener. It doesn't become confusing to the algorithms. It's not serving up music to your fan base that is going to shock and surprise them, maybe in a way where they're like, I didn't expect that from this artist, and maybe not in a good way. So I think if you're going to do something, if you're traditionally doing folk or Americana and you decide to put out a hip hop record, maybe call it something different.
So talk to me specifically. You've mentioned a little bit, but talk to me specifically about what your company does for artists. If I come to your doorstep tomorrow and say, hey, listen, I have these 12 songs. What does the process of working with streaming promotions look like from the start to the finish?
Sure. So we get probably 200 to 250 submissions through our contact form each month. Obviously it's great if you post a link to the music so we don't have to go back and request that, but we'll take a listen to the music with the promotion team. We'll say like this works and we have an audience for this, or this doesn't work. And maybe it's not good enough, or it's just, something that we don't have relationships with. We're pretty wide genre wise, and it can take just about anything, but we'll give kind of a pass fail, if you will, on the music. And we'll get back and say, that works, that doesn't work. And then, we have a call and kind of describe our services. And then it's up to the artist to, get an invoice and pay it and come on in through our submission form and onboarding form and get some information. Kind of allows us to build like a mini EPK, if you will. And then you're you're assigned a customer service rep that will kind of walk you through the process. We send out weekly reports with, it's following all the algorithmic lists. It's following your monthly listener number. It's obviously following the stream totals, and then the ads that we're getting on the music. And ultimately, we have kind of a feedback tab within our reporting system that we go out to all of our curators and say, rate this music 1 to 10 and give 5 to 10 words of feedback, so that kind of like radio research, I guess, just giving some feel as to how the music's performing and how it's being received. And we send those reports out weekly and grind along for 3 months. And hopefully at the end, we've increased the audience of the artist. And we're not doing anything that's nefarious, I guess. We're not doing any botted lists. We're not buying our way onto playlists. All that stuff's in violation of the terms and conditions and then user license agreement of Spotify. So we do our best to play by the rules and stay on the up and up and try to get real fans and really grow an artist community.
For listeners who aren't familiar with what it is, can you kind of describe what Radio Payola used to be and how things are different now with Spotify?
It's kind of like the old guard's the new guard. Payola in the 50s, 60s was, drop off a bag of money and play my music. It maybe morphed a little bit through time, but it was money, drugs, play a show for free, and we'll capitalize on it.
Yeah.
And that was the payola. I mean, and it's obviously illegal and in violation of FCC regulations. So that was an issue. In the Spotify world, it's not illegal. So you're not paying to get on a playlist isn't illegal. You're not violating federal law. It might be morally corrupt, and it's definitely against the terms and conditions and end user license agreement of Spotify. So we have seen a lot of artists bot streams, basically fake plays, and have their entire profile taken down. We've seen a lot of curators that have asked us to pay them money to get on a playlist. We put them on a do not resuscitate tab
Right.
in our grid and just don't reach out. But it's happening, and Spotify is getting better about understanding what's happening and cracking down on it. But it's, with the radio days, it was so black and white, more or less. You could see what was happening. With Spotify, you're talking about hundreds of thousands of playlists and, millions of tracks. And it's a little more gray and a little harder to see. But we've seen everything from, one independent company going and buying up logins from users to own their playlist, to then start a service and just dump a bunch of tracks on playlists that have large followings.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, all that stuff with the payola side of playlisting, those playlists don't remain valid very long. I mean, they might have a large follower count, but the streams that are coming out of it diminish pretty quickly.
Got it. Can you talk to me about one of your one of the campaigns that you've done for an artist that you're most proud of, from where you took them from where they began to where they ended up at?
Yeah, so we've got a relationship with a band called Anthem Lights, and they started out doing a lot of cover stuff, a lot of acapella stuff. We started with them about 4.5 years ago now. I think they had 30,000 monthly listeners when we started. They release music very frequently, so they're on kind of the 3 to 4 week. There's always a new track. Usually it's a cover or some type of mashup. But they're at about 2.5 million monthly listeners now, I think, last I looked. So, over the course of time, it's just, chugging away, trying to find new audience. And it's beneficial for them because they can sing things of different genres and kind of push the envelope a little bit. But we've been able to really grow their audience, and, they're not necessarily nationally renowned, but they can tour on it and they can make a living at it. So that's been really, really special. We work with some other artists from some labels, indies and majors, that I'm not really at liberty to speak about, but those have been great too. I mean, just to see something, to watch somebody win a Grammy and know that you worked part of that campaign is pretty exciting.
That's really cool. One of the things that I've thought a lot about with your company and the way that it works is with a lot of promotion. In the past, when I've released music, you pay for promotion or a publicist, and that comes back to you in some sort of like soft benefit of like press coverage or whatever. What's really interesting about Spotify is you actually get a check every month from Spotify for how many plays you get. And so I think of the word arbitrage, which is just like, if someone can pay your company $1, and for every dollar they spend with you, make $1.05 from their Spotify plays, it's like you just spend as much money as possible then until you end up with diminishing returns.
Sure, you hope that. I mean, I would never say that, we're never in the, ROI business, just because, just like a publicist, you're putting stuff out there, you're hoping to get covered. It might not. So, we can't really make any guarantees in that way. And also we've run into issues at certain times about, the return on the campaign. At the end of 3 months, like I didn't have enough streams to make up for the money that I spent on the campaign.
Sure.
And that's not really the goal. I mean, we're looking at some of these playlists where your music might be on there for 2 years. So you might be getting 35, 40 spins a week, but that's going to, for 100 weeks, that's not so bad. So what we do isn't necessarily in the short term. It's for the long-term benefit. And I'm always more interested in how that monthly listener number is changing, because I know that greatly affects the algorithms, of what's being fed out to those, personalized individual playlists that everybody has as a member of Spotify.
Where do you think the next 5 to 10 years of streaming are going to go? Do you think it's going to look the same, just more robust 5 to 10 years from now? Do you think it'll level off with usership? Do you think that there's going to be a wholesale change in how people interact with this sort of technology?
I think it'll probably become more ubiquitous. I think everybody's going to be using a consumption service. There's a big battle right now, obviously, with Apple releasing radio. They had Beats One, and now they've kind of branched off into genre-based, personalities. Spotify had that, they invested heavily in that with the original, the Doug Fords and the John Marks, and they had those faces of people that were recognizable. Many of those people have gone on now. I think with Spotify, you're going to see a much heavier investment into the algorithms of feeding you music based on your listening habits that Spotify thinks you will like. I think Apple's going to go the other direction of trying to make it personality driven. I have no idea which one will win out. I prefer the algorithm just because, the human curation or tuning into something that feels more like we have radio. So tuning into something that feels more like radio seems like a product that already exists. The discovery that I find through the algorithm of Spotify is amazing. Just to be able to listen to things and then say, if you listen to this, you might also like this. And being exposed to music that I haven't heard before is usually pretty gratifying. So I think that's where we're headed. But as far as the way that music consumption happens, I think this is the final frontier. That you can't make listening to music much easier than pressing a button and it appearing out of thin air. I loved LPs and vinyl. I loved CDs. I loved cassettes. I loved the digital download. Being able to just pick up my phone and press play and listen to the music is just about as seamless as possible.
Michael, our audience is going to find this so illuminating and interesting, and I really appreciate you taking the time. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much.